Video game localization is a difficult beast. When a game is released to an international audience, the team behind it has to be extra careful that its content will translate well to a different language, environment, or culture. Otherwise, the game may sell badly or straight up offend people. The problem is particularly prevalent when games move from Eastern audiences to Western ones. You only have to watch literally any anime to understand that countries like Japan do things very differently than others, such as the UK or the US. In the industry's early days, publishers were constantly having to change things in Eastern games to make them more digestible to Western fans. And ironically, these days it's the other way around, but we may just end up covering that in another list. One day. Wink, 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 wink. There's a wink. I'm doing a wink. For now though, let's look at some instances where a familiar title crossed the oceans but left some of its more controversial elements back at home. I'm Ben from TripleJump, and here are 10 video games that were toned down for Western audiences. Number 10. Pac-Man. Our first entry is less about how the game might have damaged audiences and more about how the audiences might have damaged the game. As anyone who's seen Scott Pilgrim vs. the World will know, the original Japanese title of the arcade titan Pac-Man translated to Puck-Man. In English, that makes sense, as our little yellow hero looks way more like a puck than a pack. Come to think of it, what is a pack anyway? A pack of cards? A six-pack? That wrestler from AEW? How has nobody questioned this name in over 40 years? Anyway, the story goes that the game's American distributors, Midway, were worried that one of the letters in Puck-Man might be easily turned into an F. Now, I don't see what's so bad about Puck-Fan, but apparently, yeah, we all know what it was going to be. Thankfully, nobody seemed to mind the change, as the Pac-Man brand and name are now a firm fixture of pop culture, and there is absolutely no risk of anyone turning it into anything naughty. Number 9. Super Punch-Out. The game that would become Mike Tyson's Punch-Out on the NES, Super Punch-Out was an arcade game in Japan and a sequel to the original Punch-Out. And I've said the phrase Punch-Out so many times now that I'm beginning to go mad, which is unfortunate because I'll need to say it a few more times. The character we are about to discuss appeared in the arcade game called Super Punch-Out, but was featured in the NES game Punch-Out rather than the SNES game that was also called Super Punch-Out. Okay, I'm done now, I hope. The gameplay was incredibly simple. You played as a rookie boxer who fights his way through various cartoony opponents until he becomes the heavyweight champion. Said cartoony characters were often stereotypes of countries or cultures, and some of them do not hold up well in the cold hard light of the 21st century. However, one stereotype was changed before it ever came westward. In the original Japanese version of the game, you encounter a Russian fighter called Vodka Drunkensky, I think. Because Nintendo of America had a strict family-friendly policy at the time, the references to alcohol were removed and our Russian pal became Soda Popinski instead. Is that name as terrifying as the old one? No. Is drinking soda before a boxing match more advisable than drinking vodka? Almost certainly, although he should probably just have a carrot or something. I thought boxers were meant to be healthy. Number 8. Contra. Beginning life in arcades, the Contra series first made its way into people's homes in 1986, although some players may not have realized they were playing Contra until much later. The run-and-gun classic was also called either Grisor or Probotector, depending on where you lived. Whilst this was done for a very sensible reason, to avoid similarities to the Iran-Contra political scandal, the words Grisor and Probotector sound more like antifungal creams than video games. Weirdly, it retained the name Contra in North America, where the scandal would have been most recognizable. Additionally, the German version on the NES had its 2 human protagonists and most of its enemies changed from people to robots. This was done because German law prohibited any media from glorifying war and showing people getting shot. Seems like Germans don't care so much for robots though. Must be terrible being a Roomba there. Despite these vast changes, the game formerly known as Contra is still lauded as a classic, and it's safe to say that its violence barely registers to modern audiences. Maybe the Germans lightened up. Still no word on how they treat their Roombas though. Number 7. Alex Kidd in Enchanted Castle. Before he was usurped by a certain blue sneaker-wearing mammal, Alex Kidd was Sega's top mascot. He certainly couldn't compete with Nintendo's mascots, but let's not blame Alex for that, he's suffered enough. Kidd's one and only 16-bit outing was 1989's In the Enchanted Castle, a game mostly about playing Janken, the Japanese equivalent of rock, paper, scissors. I'm beginning to see why this guy lost to Mario. In the Western version, when a player loses a game of Janken, they are crushed by a heavy weight. Pretty horrific, but fairly standard cartoon violence there. However, in Japan, things were a little bit racier. shall we say. If a Japanese player lost at Janken, they weren't flattened Wile E. Coyote style, but instead their clothes disappeared, leaving just a fig leaf to cover their modesty. This did not fly in the Western version, and the decision was made to drop the nudity from that release. So they wouldn't let a boy wear a fig leaf, but they'd happily crush him to death. It was the 80s, man. Different times. Number 6. Super Castlevania 4. One of the most beloved titles of all time, Super Castlevania 4 tells the story of Simon and his quest to defeat the dreaded Dracula. The game underwent a slew of changes when it traveled west, becoming much less violent in graphics so as not to upset potential customers. I suppose the publishers thought there was too much at stake. It's a vampire joke. Naturally, for a game about vampires, the original version featured a lot of blood. However, in the international release, this blood was removed. You can see this right at the very start of the game, as a large pool of the red stuff that was present in the Japanese version was cleaned up after it left the archipelago. Either that or Dracula slapped it up through a straw, I'm not entirely clear on the series lore. Furthermore, the game was stripped of a lot of religious iconography, such as crosses that originally appeared on tombstones. Also, various naked statues in the background of levels were covered up. Would American audiences really have minded that much about a few drops of blood and a couple of crosses? Well, this is a country in which a city banned saggy pants, so, decide for yourself. Number 5. Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door. The most recent game on this list and the sequel to the original Paper Mario, The Thousand-Year Door debuted in Japan for the GameCube in July 2004. Just a few months later, the game landed in the European and North American markets and was received extremely well. However, one small detail has baffled players ever since. The game features a character called Vivian, who starts off as an enemy but eventually redeems themselves as a member of Mario's group. In Japan, Vivian is portrayed as a cross-dressing male and is referred to using both masculine and feminine terms. However, in the English versions of the game, all masculine references to Vivian are gone and they are solely presented as female. Read into this what you will. Some players believe that the change was made because there is a scene in which Vivian kisses Mario, but for whatever reason, Western audiences only got a female version of Vivian, and the debate over their gender identity continues to this day. Let's just hope Vivian is living their true life, as we all should. Number 4. Final Fantasy IV. Final Fantasy IV didn't just change its name to Final Fantasy II when it made the jump to the West, it also changed the Japanese version's multiple references to Christianity. As you might expect, these were deemed not suitable for an American audience. As a result, the Holy Spell became the White Spell and the Tower of Prayer became the Tower of Wishes. Furthermore, all references to death were removed from the Western version, although several characters still clearly die on screen, so we're not really sure what good this did. Along with longer skirts for some female characters and the removal of profanity, the Western version also had an Easter egg removed in which players could unlock a pornographic magazine, or naughty book as it was written in Japanese. As you just saw, naughty books were brought to the West in the 3D remake of the game in 2007, so players could finally dive into such publications as a Lustiful Lally Ho. Honestly, you lot should be ashamed of yourselves. Number 3. Super Mario Kart. There are many things that you shouldn't do if you are behind the wheel of a car. You shouldn't text, you shouldn't fall asleep, you shouldn't paint, you shouldn't bake a creme brulee. But perhaps the most obvious thing not to do is drink alcohol. This message clearly escaped the developers of classic racer Super Mario Kart. The original Japanese version had both Bowser and Peach getting stuck into a little bit of the bubbly in their race victory animations. Look at Bowser go! He's like James Jenkins at the last Christmas party. Rumour has it he only sobered up yesterday. As we mentioned earlier, Nintendo of America was not a fan of alcohol in games, so this animation was changed for the US release of Super Mario Kart. Bowser simply raises the bottle up and down, whilst Peach chucks it up into the air like a flippin' loony. Calm down, your majesty, you'll have someone's eye out with that. Nintendo probably got this one right, as the last thing anyone needs during a game of Mario Kart is alcohol. Those blue shells cause enough fistfights already. Number 2. Various Pokemon games. The Pokemon series is chock-a-block with changes from east to west, dating right back to when the first games left Japan in the mid-90s. For example, in the Western releases of Pokemon Red and Blue, the man who is blocking your path as you go to deliver a package is sleepy because he hasn't had his morning coffee. In the Japanese version, however, the man is passed out because he's drunk. James, is that you? And that's not all. Several female characters such as Rui in Pokemon Colosseum were given longer skirts in Western adaptations, and the game corner was heavily altered in remakes of Gold and Silver out of fear that they might encourage children to gamble. All I'll say is that if the Pokemon Company doesn't think that there's gambling in video games, they clearly haven't played anything by EA. Then there's this clanger from the 4th gen. The Pokemon Registeel was originally depicted with its hand raised until some bright spark realized that it looked like a Nazi salute. The sprite was changed, and rightly so. Obviously this was a horrible oversight, but at least it leads us nicely on to number 1. Bionic Commando. Name changes, naked protagonists, drunk princesses, everything on this list so far pales in comparison to the absolute insanity that is the original Japanese version of 80s platformer Bionic Commando. When the game came westward, it was about a soldier with a bionic arm using grappling hooks to foil a plot to resurrect an evil entity called Master D. Sounds innocent enough until you learn what this game's original Japanese name was. It was called, and this is no word of a lie, Hitler's Resurrection Top Secret. That's right, Master D was originally Adolf Hitler in the Japanese games, and the villains you fought throughout the levels were Nazis. Obviously, this was never going to fly in the Western market, especially not in 1988. The game was totally overhauled, with all references to the Nazis removed, even though the story's main antagonist still looked worryingly like Hitler. Of everything covered on this list, the differences between the Eastern and Western versions of Bionic Commando are the clearest indicator of the cultural contrast at the time. Still, at least nobody's wife was turned into an arm. Thank heavens for the small mercies.